biggest impact it's done for me is just to feel a part of something and to feel that I can make a difference, even if it's in a smaller way or in a way that I don't have to be somebody that I'm not anymore, or somebody that I think somebody else wants me to be. I can just be myself in a way I can help, and there's other people to do the things that I'm not able to do.
I would say if you're on the fence about serving, I originally started serving way back in the day in high school, stacking chairs in the auditorium, picking up chairs and putting them in big piles at a different church. And that is literally how I got involved into AV, and I made a career out of AV. I'm still doing it today, and that all started because of the church, and I wouldn't be here without it.
Awesome. Good morning. Good morning. How's everyone doing today? Good. I hope your Thanksgiving was good. You're enjoying the snow, right? All right. So mixed feelings. Welcome to Velocity. It's so good to see you. If this is your first time here, I want to invite you to fill out a Connect card with as much info as you feel comfortable. Put it in the black box in the back of the room so that we can connect you with everything going on here at Velocity. Well, as a lot of you will probably remember, we're in a series right now called Jesus Said. And we've not been in this series for 4 or 5 weeks. We've been in this series for a long time because we really wanted to take a deep dive into the words that Jesus spoke. There's a reason for that. If we're going to apprentice Jesus, if we're going to be disciples of Jesus and really follow him, it's going to be very important that we know the things that he said. And so what we've done is we've taken a deep dive into the first sermon that Jesus ever gave. The Bible tells us that Jesus went up a hillside with his followers as well as many other locals who gathered around to hear him teach, and he began to say things that blew their mind. He didn't say anything that was harsh or judgmental. In fact, these were some of the most loving words that Jesus ever spoke. But the things he said were groundbreaking. They changed the expectations of what people thought life with God would really be like. He talked about the poor being blessed, the persecuted having favor. He gave us a new way of seeing murder and marriage and peace and prosperity. And point by point, the things that Jesus said changed people's perspective. And the verses that we're going to look at today are no exception. But before we talk about them, I need to give you guys a picture that I had this week that really helped me frame what we learned about last week and what we're learning about this week. The picture I had that came to me actually came because of a date I went on with Amani. Friends of ours gave us tickets to go in theaters to see this great movie, and me and Amani are huge fans of Wicked. We saw the first movie and we loved it. We saw the second movie. We've seen it on stage at the Playhouse, and we are huge fans. In the second movie, if you haven't seen it yet, it was just as good as the first. But actually, when I went home, there was another movie I wanted to watch because I grew up on the original, the OG Wizard of Oz, right? Now, this movie's incredible. In my house growing up, we had Wizard of Oz figurines. We watched this movie with a lot of regularity, and I just absolutely love this story. But while I was watching the movie, something surprising happened because I got to the point in the movie where Dorothy and the Tin and Straw Men and the Cowardly Lion go back to the wizard, having gathered the witch's broom. And when I saw this scene, I had a stunning revelation. But before I tell you about it, I want you to watch the clip.
I believe my eyes. Why have you come back?
Please, sir, we've done what you told us. We brought you the broomstick of the Wicked Witch of the West. We melted her.
Oh, you liquidated her, eh? Very resourceful.
Yes, sir. So we'd like you to keep your promise to us, if you please, sir.
Not so fast. Not so fast. I'll have to give the matter a little thought. Go away and come back tomorrow.
Tomorrow? Oh, but I want to go home now.
You've had plenty of time already.
Yeah. Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience
Wizard of Oz.
You are? I
Yes.
don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me.
You humbug!
Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh, you're a very bad man.
Oh, no, my dear. I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard.
That's awesome. So after watching this, I had an amazing revelation, and it wasn't just that in older movies, the worst you could call someone was a humbug. I also realized that this is a perfect picture of what we learned about last week. Scott introduced us to the words of Jesus at the beginning of chapter 6, which said, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them." And when I saw this scene, it was like an aha moment. Right? The Wizard of Oz is the perfect picture of what Jesus is talking about. The wizard spent all of his energy on the performance, right? The booming voice, the fire, the smoke, the larger than life image. He wanted everyone to see how great and powerful he was, but when the curtain got pulled back, they saw him for who he really was. Just a regular guy pulling levers and speaking into a microphone. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. But it's too late. Because Dorothy and his friends have already seen the truth. The wizard wasn't nearly as impressive as the image he put on. It was all a show. It was all a performance. And this is exactly what was happening in Jesus' day surrounding faith and religious practice. In the first century in Israel, righteousness, or doing the right things before God, had become performance. People were doing really big and flashy things to appear spiritual. But if we pull back the curtain, we can see that what's happening in their hearts is actually much different and much more important. Jesus could see the gap between the image that people were letting on and what was really the intention of their heart. There were people who had mastered the art of looking righteous, but Jesus was not concerned with the appearance or the performance. He was concerned with the heart behind the action. And that's why in chapter 6, he says this, "Be careful not to practice righteousness in front of others to be seen by them." Don't do righteous things, good things, holy things, spiritual things, just so that people will see you and think that you're impressive. Because if that's what you're doing, you've already gotten the reward. The applause, the admiration, the reputation, you've got it. But if people want the relationship and the joy and the peace that comes from life with God, their intentions must be changed. Well, one way that Jesus calls this out in the next verse is in how people actually give, how people are generous. Look quickly at verse 2. It says, "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as hypocrites do in the synagogue and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full." Jesus teaches us that people would give publicly. They would give when people were noticing their generosity so that someone could have a certain impression of who they are. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about this later, but it's important to build the foundation of what we're talking about today, because today, Jesus doesn't just talk about giving, he talks about something else. Look at what he says in verse 5. "And when you pray." And those 4 words, believe it or not, are extremely important. Notice that Jesus doesn't say, "Now on another matter, prayer," or "Now let's discuss something else that's important, prayer." No, he says, "And when you pray." And this "and" means he's connecting this back to verse 1. So he talks about don't practice your righteousness in front of others in the way you give, and when you pray. This idea of prayer is just as connected to the first verse as everything else, because Jesus knows if we are going to be able to boast and be performative with our giving, the exact same thing will be true about prayer. What we are warned about here doesn't just apply to giving, it applies to prayer as well. In fact, watch how similar the structure of verse 2 and verse 5 are. On giving, Jesus says, "So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do." And then in verse 5, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, because they love to pray, standing in the synagogue and on the street corners to be seen by others." Same warning, same problem, just a different area of life. Because if people are able to practice generosity in a boastful and performative way, they'll do the same with their prayer life. But there's more that's going on in these 4 verses than just that word and. Look again, it says, and when you pray. So in these 4 verses, we have the and, which connects it to the first thought, but then we have this next word, when. Jesus doesn't say, if you pray. Jesus doesn't say, for those of you who are in the habit of praying. He doesn't say, if you feel super spiritual one day and you decide to say a prayer. He says, when you pray. It's not a suggestion. It's not optional. It's not an assumption. Jesus assumes that if you're following him, prayer will be a part of your life. And when we hear something like that, all of a sudden, if we're not careful, we can feel really judged. Like, does Jesus expect his followers to be super spiritual and have it all together? Because that's not me. And if that's what you're thinking right now, that is not what Jesus is saying, and that's not me either. He's not expecting his followers to be super spiritual. He's not being judgmental and saying, you better pray, and if you don't pray, you better start doing it. No, the reason Jesus says when is because he knows something about us. He knows that in a life with God, prayer is essential. It's fundamental. It's as basic to the Christian life as breathing is to life itself. Think about it. You don't tell people, hey, when you breathe today, make sure you breathe in some oxygen. You'll really need it. No, it just comes natural. It's baked into the cake, right? You need it to live. And Jesus is saying with prayer, the same thing is true spiritually. It's essential for living life with God. When you pray, because we need it. Without it, something essential and something life-giving is missing. And here's why this matters. For a lot of my life, and maybe some of you will relate to this, I used prayer as a tool in a toolbox that I would pull out when I needed it. Maybe when I was going through something really hard or when I needed something, or maybe I was on a mountaintop experience and I was feeling super spiritual and I would pray. But Jesus is telling us prayer is not supposed to be an if, prayer is supposed to be a when. It's not a break glass in case of emergency thing or some kind of religious add-on. It's supposed to be the way that we stay connected to God, an essential part of our life with him. When you pray, not if. And it's not something that God wants from you, as if he needs to hear from you. He wants to, he desires to, but it's not something he wants from us. It's something he wants for us because we do need to talk with him. But here's the problem. Even though prayer is essential, and even though Jesus assumes that we are going to pray, he also knows that we can get it really, really wrong. And in Jesus' day, there were 2 specific ways, and there were 2 specific groups of people who were getting it wrong. Let's look again at what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 6. He says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep babbling like the pagans, for they think they'll be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you even ask him. So do you see it? Jesus warns about 2 different groups of people, the hypocrites and the pagans. 2 different groups, 2 different mistakes, but both of them miss the point of prayer altogether. Let's start with the first group, the hypocrites. When we hear the word hypocrite today, we think of someone who's two-faced, someone who says one thing and does another, someone who's really fake. And that's certainly part of what Jesus is saying here. But in Jesus' day, this word had a very specific meaning. Maybe you'll remember from previous talks that the word in Greek for hypocrite actually meant stage actor. Stage actor. It literally meant someone who puts on a mask to become a different character. And that's exactly what prayer was like in the first century. There were religious leaders, in particular the Pharisees, who had turned prayer into a performance, like a stage actor putting on a mask and becoming someone they weren't. In the first century, devout Jews were supposed to pray 3 times a day, once at 9 a.m., once at noon, and once at 3. And there's nothing wrong with that practice. If we were to develop that practice and we were to pray 3 times a day, that would be amazing spiritually. In fact, there's a person in the Bible, Daniel, who's honored for doing that. He's honored for praying 3 times a day without ceasing. But there's a big difference between the way Daniel prayed 3 times a day in his house with the Lord and the way the Pharisees were in the practice of praying. Because these religious leaders did something very different. They would actually plan their schedules around these 3 specific times, and they would make sure that at 9, at noon, and at 3, they just so happened to be in the most public places available. They would be in the middle of the town. They would be in the middle of Jerusalem or the middle of the synagogue right at that time, and they would begin to pray because they wanted everyone to see them. And all of a sudden, it's the Wizard of Oz all over again. It's fire and smoke. It's a booming voice. It's all performative. And Jesus pulls back the curtain and he tells us what's really there. He says, "Do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others." And what's behind the curtain is revealed in those words, to be seen. Their desire is to be seen by others. That's the whole point, the whole motivation. Not intimacy with God, but impressing other people. And Jesus says something really sobering. Jesus says in Matthew 6:5, "Truly I tell you, they will receive their reward in full." In other words, if you want human praise, you can get it. If you want rounds of applause and pats on the back, if you want people to see you, if you want people to be impressed, you can do that. But if it's God's attention we seek, we should go about it differently. Because God doesn't desire performance. God sees behind that curtain anyway, and he sees right into our heart, and that's what he's after. And so that's the first group, the hypocrites. They pray to be seen by others, but then Jesus tells us about a second different group, and they've got a different problem altogether. Look again at chapter 6, verse 7. "And when you pray, do not keep babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard by their many words." Now, this is a different problem altogether, because at this time, the pagans, what was meant by that was the Gentiles, the non-Jews. These were the polytheistic believers, the people who believed in many, many gods. And they were trying to impress their many gods. They were trying to get their many gods to pay attention to them. See, in the pagan world, prayer wasn't part of a relationship. It was a type of transaction. It was about getting the gods to do what you wanted or doing something big or loud enough to just gain their attention. And the way you did that was through repetition and volume. If you could say it a lot of times and if you could say it really loud, then the gods will certainly hear us. If you wanted something, you didn't just ask once, you asked 100 times, 1,000 times. You chanted the same phrase over and over and over again, believing that if you said it enough times, if you said it loud enough, maybe, just maybe, you could get the thing that your heart really desires. There's actually a really great example of this in Scripture. In 1 Kings chapter 18, we see the prophet Elijah, who believes in the one true God of the Bible, goes up against the prophets of a false foreign god named Baal. And they go head to head, and they're going to compete to see who really is the one true God. And so they make a sacrifice, and they say the first God that brings fire down from heaven and scorches the sacrifice, that is the one true God, okay? So first of all, if anyone tells you the Bible's boring, it's not boring, okay? This is like super wicked, this is awesome stuff. But the prophets of Baal go first. And I don't want you to just hear the story as you always have. I want you to really see what they did in order to get the attention of their God. Look at 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 26. "So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. 'Baal, answer us,' they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar that they had made. At noon," this is what I would have done. "At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. 'Shout louder,' he said. 'Surely he is a god.' Perhaps he's deep in thought. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's asleep and he needs to be woken up." Later it says, midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time of the evening service, a sacrifice rather, but there was no response, no one answered, no one even paid attention. From morning till evening, hours and hours of shouting and dancing and trying to desperately get Baal's attention. And nothing happened. Nothing happened because Baal wasn't a real god, but there's something else going on here. Do we see the length that they went to in order to get the attention of their god? This is because they believed that in order for a higher power to lend their ear, we had to go on and on to even have a chance of experiencing a spiritual moment. And Jesus is saying, you do not have to pray like that. Don't treat God like he's some distant, distracted deity. Don't treat God like he's someone who needs to be convinced to pay attention to you. God is so good. God is so good. Here's the truth. God is not impressed with our performance. He doesn't need to be convinced to listen to us, and he is not surprised by our needs. Jesus unpacks this really well in verse 8. He says, don't be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you even ask him. Do you catch that? The Father knows what we need before we ask him. He knows about your financial stress. He knows about your fear. He knows about your anxieties. He knows about the sickness. He knows about the family member that you're burdened for and you've prayed for years and years and years. Our Father in heaven already knows. He's not distant. He's not distracted. He's not asleep at the wheel. And he doesn't need us to shout louder or say it more times or say it the right way, like it's some kind of formula, in order to get his attention. He is your Father, and he's already listening. And so from these two groups, we learn we should not perform for others, and we shouldn't perform for God. Instead, Jesus offers us an alternative. Right in the middle of these two examples, Jesus gives us a perfect picture of what prayer could really look like. And I want you to look at verse 6. It says, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who's unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Simply go to your room, close the door, and pray to God. Now, when we read this, we might have the idea that maybe public prayer is wrong. Is it wrong to pray in church or small group or over a meal with friends? That's not quite what the Bible's saying. The Bible's not saying that we shouldn't pray publicly. In fact, in the New Testament, we see the church praying together all the time. What Jesus is getting to is the heart. What is the heart of the person praying? What prayer is really about is not the audience. What prayer is really about is not trying your best to get God's attention. It's about a real, genuine relationship with God. And so when we go into our room and we close the door, there's no distractions. There's no one left to impress. There's no performance. There's no show. It's just us and God. And this is where real prayer can happen because it's not a spectacle. There's no noise. It's quiet. We're not trying to be seen, but we know that we are already seen by our Father in heaven. But a big question remains, what does this mean for us? Because it's great to learn that this is what Jesus taught people 2,000 years ago on a hillside. But if I had to guess, I would bet that none of us have any plans to go to downtown Cleveland today, to stand in the middle of Public Square and begin praying loudly to get the attention of people. And probably none of us have like a rain dance ritual or some ritual where we say the same thing over and over and over again to get God's attention. So how do I relate what's being said 2,000 years ago to myself today? Well, even though the methods might look different, I think the heart issue 2,000 years ago and now today are exactly the same. And I think if we're honest, we can all see ourselves in both of these groups. So let's look at group one. Do we ever pray to impress others? Or, and this is important because I think this net catches more people, do we worry while we're praying if people think we're doing it wrong? Maybe you're in small group and it's your turn to pray out loud. Suddenly, you're more worried about what everyone else is thinking than actually talking with God. You're wondering if your prayer sounds spiritual enough, if you're using the right words, if people are impressed by your faith. Or maybe for some of us, that doesn't happen when we're praying because those worries happen beforehand, and it's because of those thoughts that we just choose not to pray at all. We're so worried that we might not sound the right way. We're so worried that we might not say the right words in the right order, that we'll just seem foolish. We'll just seem like we're not eloquent enough. And because of that fear, we miss out on all that God has for us in this moment because we're more focused on the people around us and what they might be thinking than on our Father in heaven. Or maybe we're like group 2. Do we ever think that prayer is a formula? Do we ever think that we need to say the right words in the right order for God to give us what we want? Like, if I just say it the right way, if I pray long enough, if I hit all the right points, then God will finally answer. Or when there's something we've been praying for a long time and God seems to have not answered that prayer, we wonder if it's because of our delivery that God has not answered that prayer faithfully. If we're not careful, we'll begin to treat prayer like a transaction instead of a relationship. And yet, to both groups, I hear Jesus say, don't worry about impressing people. And don't worry about impressing me. And that's why I love this passage, because even though Jesus is being critical of these groups, the hypocrites and the pagans, in reality, when we zoom in, Jesus is being nothing but loving. He's not condemning them, he's freeing them. He's literally saying, when you pray, take a breath. There's no one to impress, not even me. Don't focus on others, focus on me. Don't worry about being impressive. You already have my attention. Don't stress about having the perfect words. I already know what you need. Just come and talk and be with me. I was with a friend several years ago, actually, and we met at a Starbucks, and he shared a podcast with me. And I go back to this podcast all the time because the podcast is about busyness and being kind of a distracted person. And for some reason, I just need that a lot, okay? I need to hear about that kind of stuff a lot. And there's a guy who's talking in the podcast about how to really stop and get quiet with God. And this is a challenge for people who are kind of go, to really slow down. We think of every part of our faith life as a sprint. It's like we should read the Bible. That will deepen our faith with God. Okay, well, I'm going to read the whole book of Genesis today. You know what I mean? Like there's people who just take it to the extreme. And if we're not careful, we could do this with prayer. Am I praying enough? Is it long enough? Is it loud? And in this podcast, he recommended a prayer that I've now been praying for 2 years, and it's really simple. He says he gets alone with God in the morning and he sits down, he closes his eyes and he breathes and he gets quiet. And then he simply says this: God, I know that you are here right now, and I know that you love me. And then he just sits quiet. Now, for some of us, that might be like, that's lame, right? But what's at the heart of that? What's at the heart of that is there's nothing I need to say. There's nothing I need to do right now. It's enough to just sit with God in relationship and to know who he is, my God, and to know who I am, his child that he loves. And so this week, what would it look like for us to put this into practice? For some of us, it would look like praying for the first time in a long time. Because maybe it's busyness, maybe it's fear, maybe it's feeling like you're not spiritual enough, but for some reason, you don't really have a prayer life. And yet you see Jesus' words and he says, when we see that it's something he wants us to have desperately, all of us, no matter where we are on our spiritual journey. For others of us, maybe there's a point that needs corrected. Because we've kind of bought into the lie that a prayer has to sound a certain way or we have to say certain words. And so my encouragement to you this week is to think through those three things. Am I the when? Am I the person who just needs to pray for the first time in a long time because something has held me up from speaking to my Father in heaven? Or am I the first group? Am I the one who thinks I need to use certain words that might be impressive to the people around me? Or am I that second group? Am I among the group who thinks that prayer has to be some sort of formula if I'm going to get God's attention? And my encouragement to you is this week to go to your room, to get alone with God, and to just pray, knowing He is your Father and you are His child. Let me pray for us. Dear God, thank you for this very tangible message that you gave us. God, I pray that we can put it into practice this week. God, I pray that we wouldn't treat prayer like a performance and we wouldn't treat it like a formula for transactional purpose. But God, I pray that we could get alone with you and we could know that you are with us and that you are loving us and that you already know what we need. And we could talk to you the way we would talk to a good father, that we could talk to you the way that we would a friend, and that in the process of talking with you, like is true in every other human relationship, we would grow closer to you through that communication. I pray that this would be growing for our church, that this would be something that actually makes the people who call Velocity home more connected to you. God, I pray that as we speak to you this week, you would speak to us. And I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.